So, hello everybody. I'll just wait for everyone to join. Got lots of people coming in. Welcome to today's webinar on digital skills for chemists. As you can see, that's what we'll be talking about today. The live captions are enabled, so if you would like to view them, I've just put some instructions in the chat. You basically just go to the menu bar and click the CC button, and you'll be able to show transcript, and that will show the subtitles for you. If you have any questions, you can use the Q&A box to submit those and say how the panelists will be coming to those kind of at the end of the kind of formalized part of the discussion today. And if you're having any technical issues, please use the chat box. But yeah, we've got about 80 or so people listening now, so I'll kind of get into the main body of it. But welcome today to everyone's today's ChemCareers webinar on digital skills for chemists. My name is Sarah Salter, and I'm one of the in-house career and professional development advisors here at the Royal Society of Chemistry. I'll be chairing today's session. I'm an expert by no means, so that's why we have a great panel lined up for you today who will talk all about this topic, and I'm really delighted to have them with us today. So I'll ask them to introduce themselves shortly, but just to talk about a little bit about what we're going to cover today. So we're going to talk about what we mean by digital skills, why these skills are important for the digital transformation of the chemical sciences, where and how these skills are used, and we'll share some more information about how you can learn more about or develop these skills as well. So hopefully you'll gain a greater understanding of what digital skills are and why they're important. As I saw, LinkedIn came out with their most in-demand jobs for 2022, and machine learning engineer was in the top 5, which is obviously highly relatable to what we're talking about today. So now I'd like to turn to our panelists who have given up their lunch breaks to come and chat to us today. If they could tell a little bit about themselves, their work, and maybe their background. So Jeremy, could I come to you first?
Hi, yes, thank you. So I'm Jeremy Frey. I'm a physical chemist. I'm a professor of physical chemistry in the University of Southampton. But well, actually, I would say that we're looking back at it because I have to fill in these things sometimes in Southampton over my career. It's actually parallels the increasing digitalization of the whole of chemistry, both in research and indeed in teaching as well. And more explicitly, over the last since mid-2000s, I was involved in the UK science program, bringing in these computational systems into chemistry, but more than, and I think that's what we'll come out today, more than just computational chemistry. It's the whole digital information structure. And that developed through also showing a strong interest in the digital economy program that the Research Councils have been running, which we come to in chemistry sort of in some way centrally, but it expands out to all sorts of areas of the economy. And currently I'm looking after this UKRI network for scientific AI and scientific discovery, particularly focusing on chemistry and materials. And again, a major part of that has been looking at the skill base that is needed for research as we move forward with this much more digital view of how we can work in chemistry.
Perfect, exactly. So it's all about. Darren, could I come to you next?
Yes, so Darren Greene. I'm currently head of Chem Informatics and Data Science at GlaxoSmithKline and a senior fellow here. I am a computational chemist by background. I've been in GSK 30 years. And very much like Jeremy, actually, my career, although it started off as a computational chemist, it sort of mirrored how digitization, data management, high throughput experimentation and machine learning has grown from small niche areas to become extremely widespread. And so my group now, we do a lot of chemistry still, but we get involved in all kinds of other things as different parts of the company want to do the same things that we're doing in chemistry.
Perfect. Thank you, Darren. Nessa, can I come to you next?
Sure. Yes, so I'm Nessa. I'm a principal automation scientist at Syngenta currently, but my educational background was in pure synthetic organic chemistry, catalysis, that kind of thing. So I started off working in industry for AMRI at Eli Lilly, and I was a bench chemist making compounds for medicinal chemistry. But not long after I started there, I moved into high throughput experimentation, typically reaction optimization. And that fits in really well with data applications. I've learned more and more about data science. Data management is really, really important to me. And now I do a fair bit of software automation as well as using the hardware where I started out. So I do a little bit of things like Python programming, but I'm completely self-taught in that kind of sphere. So I think I'm pretty much here as a representative of the people who are not really trained in digital as a whole, but have kind of moved into that kind of sphere.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
I think really I'm bridging the gap between the chemists and the people like Darren and Jeremy and Mark who actually know what they're talking about.
Yeah, we're all here today to learn, so it's going to be really useful, and that sounds really, really interesting. And Mark, can I come on to you now?
Thanks. I appreciate someone suggesting that I know what I'm talking about. So I think the first thing is to say that I'm the chief executive of Deep Matter Group. We're a company focused on digitization of chemistry, but in particular enabling medicinal chemists, synthetic chemists, organic chemists of various different kinds to be more productive, to discover better, to be more compliant in an increasingly digital environment. My background actually is a mix of chemistry and digitization and investment. So I spent 10 years at IP Group investing in digital technologies with wider healthcare applications than just chemistry. And prior to that, I worked at a company called Tripos, which people who can remember back that far will remember was a computational chemistry company, but I am a chemist by training.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. And thank you everyone for introducing yourselves. For those watching live, you can submit your question for the panelists via the Q&A box throughout the discussion, and I'll be picking those up towards the end. And you can always say the chat box to say hello or let us know if you're having any technical issues. But now we're going to come on to the kind of meat of the topic. So looking at what are digital skills and who uses them. So we're not going to talk about productivity tools like Office or Excel, Zoom, electronic notebooks. Those are obviously really, really important and all part of it. But today we're going to focus on the more specialist skills. And I'm going to ask each of our panelists to go through these different areas and talk about the skills and how they're used in what they do. So I'm going to talk first about programming and Python and R. So I think, Darren, you were interested in talking about this, but anyone can feel free to jump in and add it as well.
Yes, so I would say programming is one of those things that everyone should have an idea about, because it's not just people that are professional programmers that develop, for example, software applications. You talked about productivity tools. Programming is the ultimate productivity tool for people if you're manipulating data, particularly these days when you're getting larger amounts of data and you want to manipulate that, get it into shape and run statistical analysis on it. Python and R are really key tools for people. And regardless at the level, you can write very, very small programs that, compute averages or something, all the way to quite sophisticated things. And it's a great thing for everyone to have, because even if you are not a professional programmer, and, I'm mostly a manager these days, so my programming skills degrade quite dramatically. Knowing what programming is about, knowing what the challenges are when you're talking to people that are programmers, all these things help you sort of engage in the digitization process with people, knowing what's achievable, what's hard, all those sorts of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anyone else have anything else to add? I think you mentioned, Nessa, about Python before.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'd say is, like, Python is wonderful. It's so powerful. And even when I was right at the very, very start of understanding even the smallest thing about programming, I was able to do incredibly powerful things with this tool. And I don't think that's me being a genius. I think that's Python being absolutely just incredible. And, anything you want to do, I pretty much just break it down into the individual tasks and Google every single one of them if I have to. But the time I could save with that was life-changing.
Yeah, I mean, I think.
No, go ahead, Mark.
I would just add that I think it's important to set people's expectations on how much of this sort of stuff they would want to know. And I think the best sort of parallel that I can give is that an organic chemist would never choose to absolve themselves of having entire knowledge about, for example, analytical methods for studying a compound. That doesn't necessarily mean that they need to be a specialist in LCMS or a specialist in MR or whatever it might be, but to have a good sort of grounding in some of those core skills, I think will be important for the future, such that, you know, when they're working with maybe a specialist programmer or a specialist computational chemist, that there is commonality in language and the ability to do things around the edges that make life a little bit easier and a bit more productive.
I'd certainly agree with that. And I think to exemplify the importance that we in Southampton, along with a number of other universities, have now introduced programming as a core into the available core part of the chemistry curriculum. It can lead on to more specialist parts into the digital skills, but it's available there for all the chemists. Now, I mean, I suspect Darren and I come from the generation where we were all Fortran programmers, really. But you know, and actually Fortran has moved on, I discovered, enormously, and I could go back to being a Fortran programmer. I got involved with the statisticians, so I became an R programmer. But unfortunately, we decided that we had to teach Python. So I've been back learning how to program some of these things and get it right in Python. And so I think that just shows how important and how brilliant it is. And when we show some of the students how you don't have to sit there with ChemDraw and draw 50 million structures out by hand, you can just get a list of things and program it and be a beautiful table. And as soon as you learn a bit more with some of the kits we might talk about, color them in all sorts of ways and do everything, all in a couple of lines. And then, why did I spend so much time doing it in another way? And I think that's Nessa's point. A little bit of knowledge here, you can save a huge amount of time and produce something. And more to the point, when your boss says, could you do it slightly differently? It's not a weekend's job to fix it. But the other side that I think that I noticed we haven't quite perhaps put on here is that it's not just the programming, there is a thought process around programming. And perhaps this is something that can be lost if you don't do it slightly more formally. There is the software engineering side. And we're not talking about turning everyone into software engineers, which is, I think, Mark's point, but you do it properly in the sense of commenting the code and use one of the modern tools, these Jupyter notebooks, so it can, and ask somebody else, can they understand what you've done? And write it in such a way they can. That's critical. And that's something that has, there's a term academic software, which is that software that can only be run by that person in that group and probably not even by them 6 months later. Not really the desirable outcome for this. And that's all the tools to make that better. That's the digital framework we're in. The web tools, the Googling, the stuff like that means that you don't have to do that. And it doesn't take a lot longer, even in the first pass, to do it right. But nonetheless, that's something that I think has to be taught to people. But when you do that, you have really valuable skills. It's the programming plus that then becomes available. You can do stuff with other people. You can then work with other people, and they will use your stuff, which is always great when they use your code, as long as it's right. So programming is critical. It's coming in all the way. It's one of those skills that I think is hugely, as Nessa says, life-changing when you can do it. But it's worth actually investing a bit of time to do it properly.
Oh, that's very interesting. Does anyone else have anything else to add on programming before we move on to AI and machine learning?
If I could just add, I think we should mention the growth of open source software and tools has made programming very accessible. What it also does scientifically for you, it allows you to stand on the shoulders of whole communities of real experts who generate libraries that you can reuse, be they statistical libraries or in chemistry, things like RDKit, where all of a sudden you get to use tools that people with, decades of experience and expertise have produced that would be very difficult for you to do yourself. All of a sudden you can just use them. And that really changes how you can learn and what you can do very quickly. And things like Git and code management, as Jeremy was saying, all these communities are about working together and contributing together. And so I say it makes it very, very accessible for people just starting, as well as for those people that are real experts and fully embedded in the communities.
Yeah, it sounds like there's lots of different ways to engage with it, lots of different ways of learning and using and developing those tools. And they just sound, like you said, Nessa, wonderful. They just save so much time, and there's that community you can get involved with. And we're going to come later on to more about how you can learn and develop these skills as well. So moving on to AI and machine learning, I think Darren and Mark, you were keen to take this one on, but of course anyone can jump in as well.
Mark, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think machine learning is a sort of interesting an area, because ultimately I think there is a need for real expertise in the algorithmic part of the work that goes on here. So at some level, I employ a series of machine learning specialists, but none of them originally came out of a chemistry field of work. They actually came from quite different disciplines, finance and various others. But I think what's important as we use more and more of these techniques is that we embed chemistry knowledge and chemistry data into the engagement with those machine learning specialists. So I think, again, a little bit like the programming part, I think it's important for chemists to have familiarity around the techniques and how they're used. I mean, some of them don't sound very different, I think, to old-fashioned data analysis techniques. There may be more compute power, more data, more access through cloud, but ultimately, I think if there isn't an appreciation of how the methodologies are used, the risk is that there is over-interpretation of the results, or a disproportionate sort of bias provided to them. That would be my perspective. So it's an understanding of the principles such that when using the technologies or collaborating with them, that you appreciate their strengths and weaknesses.
Absolutely, that rigor as well is important. Darren, did you want to add to that?
Yes. I smile when we say artificial intelligence. I have to say, I don't think anyone's doing artificial intelligence at the moment in chemistry. We're all doing machine learning. And by the time, the cohorts that at university now come into the industrial workforce, machine learning is going to be everywhere. And ranging from, if you talk to HR, you'll be talking to an AI bot first. That's all machine learning. In chemistry, this is really around prediction. Can we predict what's going to happen next? And can you use your data that your company has to build your models to really turn that data into knowledge that you can reuse? And in chemistry, this is an old and venerable discipline called QSAR, quantitative structure activity relationships, where before there was deep learning, there were lots of other methodologies that people used. And we're using it more and more. We must mention generative models, which are a revolutionary thing that are coming out of the machine learning field. So basically, how do you generate new ideas using machine learning? We're using that a lot. A lot of finance is going into startup companies in the pharma industry, particularly using these technologies, and that's set to revolutionize sort of ideation, if you like. What could I make next? What might I make next? These machine learning technologies are very, very powerful. And so, as Mark said, getting an understanding of how they work, what they're good for, what you can trust them to do, and what you should be suspicious of of what they do. All of these things, even if you're not a practitioner, because you're going to be working with them, you need to sort of do some reading and get some experience with these things, because they're going to be part of the workforce in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the other things I think we're seeing a lot of as well is that as the what's happened historically is that people have worked with fixed data sets, be it a reaction database that comes from somewhere, or a sort of a correlation QSAR model, as Darren described, with quite traditional, well-established data sets that the market knows quite well. I think what's starting to happen is that we're seeing a couple of things that are interesting. The first is that there is an increasing focus on bringing new data sets which already exists. So, for example, the historic electronic lab notebook content or data that has been collected previously. But I think the second area, and will be interesting, I think, for future chemists as well, is actually generating data specifically to train AI and machine learning models. So rather than just working with data that's been collected for particular reaction types, is actually specialized sets of data that have been designed to train these systems. And that will obviously contribute not just to the machine learning and AI, but actually to the activities that chemists may be engaged in and the disciplines that chemists may ultimately adopt for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Perfect.
I'd just add to that, obviously, I mean, as I said, I look after this AI network for chemistry, so I think these things are really important. But I would stress what Darren and Mark have implied, that there's a spectrum here of stuff that we chemists have been doing for 50 years or more. In fact, actually, you could even argue that a lot of stuff that the Victorian chemists were doing, looking at atoms in molecules, is exactly what's we're doing here. And the spectrum through to, well, we know that this has to be the right equation because the thermodynamics have told us this, but we need the parameters. That's the equation fitting part, but all the way through to the trying to extract patterns that amongst large numbers of collections of molecules and data that we've got that are not so obvious to the human eye. I think then that leads on to the problem of how do you get the knowledge, the discovery out of that? So the model, you might want to know what is the next drug we should try. And that may be all that's important at the moment because we need it. But at some point, you probably want to know why and what was going on there. And trying to find out what the model was doing is a whole area itself, and explainable models. And I think that's got to be kept in mind, how you do that. And there's discipline, but chemists are really very good at building models and then asking the models to do things that they weren't supposed to do and discovering what breaks. And that tells you a lot. We chemists love breaking things, not hopefully in the lab, but and you try and break these models. But I think where it's going as well, and some of the stuff Nessa was talking about, and Darren with the high throughput and stuff, is that, and just now Mark saying, the models now can actually suggest what you should do next. So there's an element here, these active learning, the reinforcement learning says, well, if you want to explore this bit of chemical space, you don't have any information there. So I do suggest you go and make some measurements. But exactly which ones and where, again, this generative approach is very interesting. But there is a kind of tyranny here in that the whole idea of doing this and the whole computer-aided drug design was we want to make fewer molecules, but to make the right ones. So we use the computational chemistry, we use the machine learning to predict which ones to make. But to get good models, you need to train them on good quality data. And where do you get the good quality data from? You have to make the molecules. So here we're still making molecules, and I would come back to say that just because we can do all this computing doesn't mean we shouldn't make things. And you actually have to learn how to make lots of them, but not very much of each one, because we can't afford to do that. Not enough atoms around. And that means we've got to, the analytical chemist has already been mentioned by Mark. It's really important we learn how to make the measurements on even less material so that we can actually make more things and learn more stuff. So machine learning has created a new part of chemistry, but it involves still all of chemistry being working out here. Including the bit that perhaps gets closest to the traditional AI are some of the things that tell you how to make a molecule. So you can think about making it, and your machine learning model says you should make it, then you've got to actually make it. And increasingly now that we can look up, predict pathways and so on. So it's in every bit of chemistry, but every bit of chemistry is still needed.
Absolutely. Perfect. Nessa, could come to you next, because robotics and automation and software automation, which is a big part of this making things, and chemistry as well. Can you talk a little bit around that, please?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, that fits in perfectly with what Jeremy was just saying about make lots of molecules, but not very much of each. I mean, that's a good amount of what we end up doing with robotics. But yeah, automation generally splits into two categories. So there's the hardware automation, the actual robotics, and there's the software automation, which can probably broadly be put around the realm of programming that we were talking about earlier. So yeah, I love using robots in the lab. It's great. I use them for things like dispensing solids, dispensing liquids into things like 96 well plates. And I can use that to run experiments. So I most often do that for optimizing a reaction. So I might have the same reaction in every single well of a 96 well plate. But you know, there are so many things you can do with this. You can use it for optimizing crystallization in pharma. You could use it for obtaining solubility data for pharma, which is incredibly useful at the realm of process chemistry. So yeah, people talk to me a lot about how robots make things faster. But you know, whenever this comes up, then I always remind people that actually we should be doing things better if we have robots, not faster. And we should also probably be doing things in a complementary way to how humans do them, because you know, we already have the humans. The humans are very, very good at what they do. So maybe we should leave the robots to do things that robots are good at doing. So yeah, software automation kind of comes alongside that. So it's sort of like a gateway to other topics. So when I started off as a high throughput chemist, I just worked with the robots. I designed the experiments, I ran the experiments, and I looked at the data at the end, the same as any bench chemist would do, except in batch, I suppose. But you know, as time went on, then I realized I needed to do more and more of the other parts, because that was how I would make things better. So I learned how to use Python, and that massively improved my workflow, improved my efficiency, and in some cases actually expanded what I could do into, you know, entirely new areas, I suppose. So yeah, it kind of fits in with everything else, really. I mean, I've ended up expanding into more and more about data and digitalization. Had to work a lot with data management. Of course, I get tons of data at the end, because in every experiment I've just run 100 different sets of conditions, or maybe made, you know, 100 different products or something like that. So yeah, you end up learning a ton of stuff, equipment maintenance, particularly working with glove boxes, LCMS, learning how to maintain it, fix it. Chemistry knowledge, you need to work with potentially med chemists, process chemists, and you need to understand what they're talking about. And sometimes, you know, working with all these different people, it's fantastic, but a lot of the time you need to also figure out the bits they're not telling you. So a med chemist will, you know, think, oh, well, I've been doing this project for ages, so I understand that what I want here is the highest yield no matter what. Quite often that's not true at all. You want something that will separate easily, or even better, you don't realize that you actually want the automation chemist to come in and say, actually, if you thought about doing this a completely different way, and that hadn't really come up in the project before, things like that. So you really need the chemistry knowledge. But yeah, because I end up making so much data, I also usually end up needing to work with Chem Informatics and sort of understanding the basics of machine learning. So I'm not the person who's working with the machine learning most of the time, but I need to understand how that works broadly, because it's going to have such an impact on how we use the robots in the lab.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds, yeah, challenging, but learning and working with lots of people, but also those transferable skills, the working with different types of people, communicating, asking the right questions to get the best out of it. It sounds because those go hand in hand in any situation. Cool. Next, I think we're going to come to Darren or Mark for modeling and simulation.
Why don't you go first, Darren, this time?
Okay, thank you. So yes, modeling and simulation, most people would immediately sort of start thinking about computational chemistry, classical techniques, quantum mechanics, molecular mechanics, and dynamics. And the growth in available compute power is the story here. So you know, when I started at GSK, you know, there are techniques that were well known, free energy perturbation, for example, but you couldn't hope to do those calculations in a timely way. They would take weeks, you know, and so what's changed in the last decade is you know, the massive growth in available compute power, be they GPUs or, you know, cloud-based resources, and what that has meant is that we're now able to do pretty sophisticated simulations for, in our case, protein and ligand interactions. If you're working in other areas, you could be simulating, materials, for example. And these things are incredibly powerful, very accurate. And the great thing about modeling and simulation is it's not data hungry. It's sort of based on physics. There are some parameters, but generally, you don't need to generate large data sets in order to train your model, because it's physics based. And so you can start with one ligand in your protein, and you can start designing. You can start using these techniques, and so that's growing and becoming more and more useful. And I'll finish with the interplay actually with machine learning. Modeling and simulation is a great way of generating data sets for machine learning. So I think there's going to be a story in the next 5 years of how these two disciplines work better together, actually to generate even more powerful solutions and approaches.
One of the things I think is particularly exciting in this space. I mean, obviously we're seeing a lot about quantum and so on that's sort of coming of age, but I also actually see another opportunity, which is perhaps to go back to some of the empirical, also semi-empirical sort of models, but with new data streams that are becoming available. And people who know me will know that I'm a big advocate of time course data. Reactions, when I was doing my chemistry degree, we were told that it was purity, identity, and yield at the end of the reaction. But we all know fundamentally the reactions don't fail at the end of a reaction after 5 or 10 hours. They fail at some point in time. And I think with the introduction of cloud-based computing and the ability to have digital technology reach you in the laboratory itself, I see an opportunity with both current but also new data streams that can be collected, a little bit like a health monitor around your wrist, collecting streams of data that are not necessarily the traditional preserve of chemists, that we may be able to change what we do on the fly in the lab, and where ultimately we take our chemistry, but that will only be enabled by having high quality sort of modeling and simulation sitting at the back of these systems, as chemists perform activities in the lab with real-time sensors collecting that data. And some of that moves then into robotics and automation as well. So I think that I think there's an opportunity for digital skills that are maybe more traditional right now. So if you think about them as being sort of, analysis, planning before you go into the lab, and then retrospective analysis. But I actually believe there's an opportunity with the machine learning, AI, and robotics and automation into the cloud for us to start to see kind of real-time intervention as a result of digital information being provided back to chemists. And the best way, I guess, of trying an analogy into a different field is to think about how traffic alerts in your sat nav in your car might affect what you're doing as you go on a journey from A to B, or how the things like real-time braking, or I was going to say smart motorways. I picked up a speeding fine the other day, so I'm trying not to think about that too hard. But I think what you see is this chance for digital technologies to not just influence how well a chemist performs, but really reshape how chemistry is done in the future.
Yeah, definitely. It's a really valuable point. Keep evolving and developing, and possibly reshape what we know. Cool. So I'm just aware of time and make sure we keep moving onwards. Maybe if we could talk a little bit about Chem Informatics. I think Darren, you wanted to pick this one up.
Yes, sorry, I seem to be first, but I think it's just the order of the topics.
Yeah.
So Chem Informatics, and this is where chemists come into their own in this whole machine learning, data management, data science space, because you have to understand chemistry in order to do good Chem Informatics. How you manipulate structures, how you represent structures in a computer, and get it right. There's a lot of attention to detail, and you need to understand things like stereochemistry and things like this, these are not natural things for physicists and mathematicians and people that computer scientists that tend to be in the machine learning world. You've got to get this right, otherwise you're going to get junk out the other end. And so industrial groups for a very long time starting with chemical registration systems, in the early days. But we've always had this core of very specialist chemistry-based informaticians, and that gives you, these days with coupling again with machine learning and large data sets, if you've got that chem informatics expertise, you can do some extraordinarily powerful analyses and things like this. But it all comes down to being a chemist and really understanding chemistry, because chemistry is very hard to teach to non-chemists. And so, this is, career paths for chemists. If you want to do data science, the Chem Informatics is a good one for you.
Yeah, thanks, Darren. Yeah, so I've been talking last year, quite a few chemists who came to you were looking to move into that data science space.
Yeah.
So something that's coming in up more and more. I think we're planning on running a webinar about it later in the year, how to make that transition, because it makes complete sense. Perfect. We talked a little bit about data analysis and management, so I'm going to skip over that one because in time we've still got lots to cover. So we talk about why these skills are really important. So I know there's a link to sustainability, the circular economy, the low carbon economy, environmental and human health. There's lots of aspects of why it's important. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. But first, I wanted to highlight some research that the RSE published in 2019 called Digital Futures. The link is there, and it's all about this topic. So showing about these interviews with senior leaders from a wide range of sectors and disciplines, talking about the importance of digital skills in academic and industrial R&D. So that's across pharma and biotech, energy, the environment, materials as well. So I'd really encourage you to look at those videos to learn more and find out more about it and how to engage with it. They're a really useful resource as well. And I worked on the 2021 Payne Award survey, and one of the things that came out of that when we were working with the recruitment agency that sponsors it, CK Group, that they saw an increased need amongst employers this year for chemical scientists with skills in AI, blockchain, bioinformatics, and data analysis. So it shows that there's kind of that growing trend amongst employers as well. So now we're going to talk about why these skills are so important. What are their significance in the digital transformation of the chemical sciences? So Darren, can I come to you again first? Just first on my list. And I know you work on the AI fellowship at GSK a little bit. If you want to talk about that and why these skills are so important to the digital transformation of chemistry. It's a mouthful there.
Absolutely. Why are they important for? So GSK, we are a pharmaceutical company, and it's all about the benefit to our patients at the end of the day. So how do we do things faster, and how do we get to a successful drug, faster and cheaper, and that will then sort of maps onto benefits for patients. They get new drugs earlier in their disease, and those drugs hopefully will be more affordable. And if you can predict what you should be making next, importantly, if you can make sure that every compound you make next has a lot of information content that you'll learn from very quickly, that's how you'll more quickly discover drugs. The broader AI landscape in pharma is also around target discovery, genetics, and so on, and there's even larger data sets there. And so one of the things that GSK does with their AI fellowship is to be based in London, close to where a lot of the deep minds and Facebooks of the world are. So you're trying to tap into people with those incredible machine learning skills, and we run a fellowship where people come to GSK to work on sort of self-nominated research programs, but they have access to our data sets and our advice and our skills, and they can sort of see what it's like to work in pharma, work with pharma, and hopefully they'll stay with pharma at the end of the day. So that's quite a new thing for us. It's quite unusual, to have a completely focused on things like machine learning as opposed to chemistry and biology. And we're in our early days, but it's very exciting, and there's lots of really talented people in that program.
That's great. Thanks, Darren. And yeah, sounds really interesting and important. Nessa, could I come to you next? I think you wanted to touch on interdisciplinary, which you've already kind of referenced.
Yeah, it's very true. So yeah, I think I mean we could go on for ages about why digital transformation itself is important, which is kind of part of this question.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think maybe I'm saying this because I'm in that position, but it's very useful to have someone who is a go-between between the chemists or the biologists or whoever is working at the forefront of the technical research here, and the IT folks and the bigger picture kind of people. That tends to be missing, and it's quite difficult to find. I think there are not that many people who are currently in that sort of area, because you need to know a little about a lot of things, which probably summarizes my entire life pretty much here. But yeah, like the efficiencies you can gain and the sort of shared benefits that you can have. I talk a lot to my colleagues in biosciences and in analytical chemistry and all these sorts of areas. And we quite often find we have a lot in common, and we haven't shared this knowledge before because we didn't realize that we had it in common. We're dealing with the same problems and the same issues. And it's identical when you go outside the company as well. If I talk to colleagues pre-competitively at other companies, we end up dealing with the same things. And sometimes, there's nothing confidential about sharing how to improve our approaches to these things. And I think while it's such a growing area and such, digital transformation is of absolutely key importance to most of the big companies probably all the big companies in the sort of pharma, agrochemical, that kind of sphere at the moment. So yeah, these skills, we're needing more and more of them. And I think it's a great position to be in to have, this kind of broad understanding of where we need to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I say again, keep getting more and more people coming to me asking for me information about how to make that jump as well. Jeremy, can I come to you next?
Yeah, just like to say, we sometimes forget how much digital transformation has already occurred in chemistry. I mean, go back a little bit, look at some pictures of organic chemistry labs a few years ago, no computers around anywhere. Well, there are now as many computers in an organic lab as there are in any other lab. I used to have to look up things in chemical abstracts. Was a book. Well, it was a series of books, a right painting, science citation index to move forward. We don't do that anymore. Well, okay, that's, we have Google and stuff, but what's really interesting for the chemists is we can look at chemistry through that route, because chemistry has been encoded in these things. And that was the chemical informaticians who've done that. And it works so well, the chemists forget that there was, the computer has suddenly understood this molecule. Well, that didn't happen without a lot of effort. And there's a lot can be built on that, and a lot more can happen. So actually, we've transformed huge amounts of chemistry already. And look what if you think about it in that sense, how much time and efficiency and interest and finding stuff out we've already saved ourselves, how much more we can do. And that's what the next generation comes on and comes do even more, because of the linking of the automation, because you can conceive of stuff, find out what's been done and get it done. I'm not suggesting we'll shift over to all those IBM dark labs, because I'm very suspicious that they won't give you back the compound that you actually wanted. And then if they can, they'll charge you far too much for it. But, some things can be done like that. And as it says, people do some things, computers do others. And data, I think one of the really interesting things that Darren mentioned about this fellowship is if you get it, you get access to GSK's data. Now, he and I know this is extremely valuable. I had one of my students had come and work in Darren's outside his office so he could use the data for understandable reasons. That's the only way to have done that problem. So this interaction of people, data, machines, learning how to deal with it, coming up with the new problems, thinking new ways of dealing with that. This is the exciting part of the project, of the digitalization project.
I'm going to just pick out a slightly different topic area, actually, which is that I think that digital transformation in the chemical sciences is important as well, because as we evolve our sort of holistic worldview of the way that we should do drug discovery, we're actually not able to just rely on the data and the content that we've had in the past. So the people that taught me how to do chemistry are largely dead now because they were bathing in benzene or whatever it might have been. But actually, that's just not an acceptable way to do chemistry anymore. And we're increasingly focused on sustainable mechanisms for manufacturing molecules or better conditions. And that's not the chemistry that's been done for the last 200 years on average. So I think that, as we think about, new methodologies for sharing data and enabling, cleaner chemistry, more sustainable chemistry, environmentally friendly, safer, then we are going to require, to be able to move at the pace that we want to in society, we need to be able to use these tools to share that information and to progress.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mark. So just keeping an eye on time. And there's quite a lot of questions now about developing these skills. Where can people learn these skills? And I think that that's a really, really important question about where can you learn these. And I know, Nessa, you've taught yourself a lot. Other people have come from a computational background and have learned these skills and developed them over the course of their career. And there's lots of different ways to get involved with it. So bearing in mind that some of the audience may have the computational training and want to learn more, or may know nothing and just want to start exploring and learning, I was wondering if I'd come to you and share your advice about, where can you learn and develop these skills? That community you said is really important for sharing ideas and solving those same challenges you're having across different fields. Jeremy, could I come to you first? I know you're involved with the interest group, which is probably a really good place to start.
So yes, I mean, I was looking at some of the questions, and absolutely right, where can you go? So first of all, yes, definitely join the Chemical Information and Computer Applications group of the Royal Society of Chemistry, and look back at the resources of all the webinars that were run teaching you how to use various tools. You probably have to have a little bit of knowledge, but there are some really excellent stuff there. Look at our AI network, YouTube. So they're all on the YouTube channel, and the AI network has a YouTube channel too. So if it's a question of upskilling things and finding out what's interesting, there's a good lot of stuff out there. If you just want to learn some programming, LinkedIn courses, Coursera, FutureLearn, lots of places. However, as someone was asking, where could you come and do a chemical informatics course like you could do a bioinformatics course? The answer is there aren't many places, but you could come and do digital chemistry masters in Southampton. Manchester, I'm not sure if it is running its chemical informatics. It had a long running one. Sheffield, very strong interest in chemical informatics there for many, many years, which was actually in the informatics department, but run by an absolute expert in the area. You will see some more master's courses, I'm sure. We've built it in the Southampton undergraduate chemistry course on computational and digital skills is now running, if you want to come and start there, but the master's should be up for running for next year as a master's year. I think that what people are suggesting here is we probably do need to provide the CPD type courses for those people who are already in industry who want to know these new skills. The best way is actually to, if you like, learn them on the job by learning some programming and then learning a chemical informatics problem, a bit of research problem you have to do. Or shouldn't ignore the process side of things, so manufacturing. But I think that's something that certainly in the University of Southampton we're looking at. How could we provide some of those courses and providing with the relevant accreditation so that you actually not only have learned it, but you can prove you've learned it. That's a slight problem. But I think this is a very important area. There are more courses appearing. There are very valuable online resources, excellent books. There's a tradition in this area of providing the PDF of the book and possibly the Jupyter notebooks that go with it, often for free. But the books are not so expensive on Deep Chem and others. More difficult if you want to go to the materials side. Pharmaceutical side is better covered. Materials is even more complicated. And if you're trying to understand how to predict whether you get a better battery or some device, even more difficult. But all these are important challenges. So there is material out there. And I think you'll see courses growing. But I think definitely join the interest group and agitate for the RSC to help us run CPD courses is probably one of my recommendations.
Great, definitely, yes. Perfect. Nessa, could I come to you next? With the same question.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I pretty much learned a lot of this just myself as I'm going along, which involves a lot of internet resources, basically. So I'm just like constantly on Stack Overflow for programming. I watch an awful lot of webinars, actually, because there's a lot when it comes to high throughput, automation in the lab, that kind of thing. But actually, in fact, I should say I share a lot of these on my website if anyone wants to. Maybe I'll put the link in the chat at some point. I have a list of resources for people wanting to learn high throughput and a list for people wanting to learn simple coding. And I have those lists simply because people ask me so often that instead of giving the same answer all the time, I say, here's a link.
Yeah.
But actually, genuinely, the most important thing that has worked for me is having this cross-industrial chat. So, you know, everyone knows I spend a lot of time on social media who's in this chat. But I do that because I learned so much from there. And it's talking to people at, well, people within my company, of course, but also people at other companies, people sometimes in other industries, and a lot of academics. So whenever, you know, as I said, in automation, I have to deal with a lot of other fields of chemistry and sometimes things way outside chemistry. So having the go-to people to talk to about that has been incredibly useful. And those people are all there on Twitter.
Yeah, absolutely. I learned so much from social media about all the different areas. It's such a powerful tool. Yeah, and if you can pop the link in the chat at some point, that would be great. There's definitely someone saying that link would be amazing. That sounds great. So if when you get a chance, you could do that. Mark, could I come to you next? Did you?
Yeah, I'm not going to list things. I would just encourage people to think about industrial internships. So even a short period, you know, as a chemist in an industrial environment, and very quickly, these skills will be foisted upon you because they are essential within the organizations that are developing now. So that's all I would encourage from my point of view.
Absolutely, yeah. Internships, really, really helpful way of gaining some experience as well. And then Darren?
Yeah, I was going to mention that, and industrial placements as well. Yeah, really good routes. I was just going to cover PhDs, actually. Obviously, specialist PhDs in Chem Informatics, machine learning, computational chemistry. If you're really in love with this, go and do a PhD. Lots of great groups, as Jeremy was calling out in the UK. The other side is, so for example, we have a PhD scheme with Strathclyde, which is a mechanistic organic chemistry thing. So it's a very lab-based synthetic chemistry PhD. All of those students, right, we insist they learn quantum mechanics to model their reactions. So, you know, don't think you have to do a PhD in the computational field to get these skills, because increasingly, if you do one in an experimental field, you're going to be asked to learn this sort of side of things as well. And so you will get that if you choose the right PhD.
Absolutely, that's great. I'm just going through some of the questions because lots of them are about training and accessing and learning. There's one here that was great. Said what regarding there's a question about what is the more commonly used aspect of it, the visualization or creating and fitting models, or maybe something else? In what areas are those programming aspects applied? I don't know if anyone can take that one.
All of these things.
All of these things. Thank you.
R, Python, whatever. They're all used for manipulating your data in the first place, constructing the models and presenting it. Visualizing the data is just as important. There are packages, lots of packages, depends whether you're visualizing onto the web or so. And then there are specialist packages for doing these things that the data, you can bring your data into. You know, these days you can, even Microsoft Office has, well, if you're on Windows anyway, has plugins that will do the molecules. I don't have a Mac, it's a problem. But all these areas, and there are some other specialist packages, specialist workflow engines that are there as well. There are all things that build up in this hierarchy, but actually most of the languages will do most things, and there are libraries for most things. But sometimes you do need to appeal to a more specialist language if you want to achieve some particular aspect with the automation or something with the databases. But again, I think that's where I would agree with Nessa. That's where you go and consult the expert how to do that. But you have to understand how to talk to the expert and use what they have come back with. I think one of the other things I noticed is the thing about standards as well. And this is a incredibly crucial problem, making sure that your data and the models are described well enough. And it is something that the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry, IUPAC, is really trying to move on, trying to move into the digital age and provide the same sort of standards basis that it did for chemistry for the last 100 years to move forward. It's very difficult to get agreement and to do it quickly enough. IUPAC didn't always move very fast, and digital things move fast. So, but trying to get that out there so that people produce data in a way that it's still usable a few years later, this is a really big deal. And finding people who will actually have an interest in it and push for it and persuade their companies to fund some of this work, it's really important, because otherwise the data decays very rapidly.
Absolutely. Great. And just to let people who are listening know, the recording will be available on YouTube afterwards later this afternoon. So keep checking back. But I think you get emailed a copy of it as well. One of the other questions was about what are some of the areas of research at the forefront of modeling and programming? I don't know who would like to take that one.
Ooh, forefront of. I think one of the areas, so I think you've seen from what people are saying that trying to understand what a molecule does and what its properties are, what its structure is and so on, that's not bad. We can do that. We can't do enough of it, even with all the computing power. Working out what it does when it sits inside a protein, that gets a bit more complicated. Now, AlphaFold has made a bit of difference to that, but we have no dynamics in there. What that does when it's sitting inside a cell and getting inside of a membrane, now we're getting a bit more challenging. And we kind of know, we can just about predict what crystal structure something will have. That's difficult and very important for the drugs too. Now let's have a more complicated material and get its structure and what its properties might be. That's really pushing the limits, and incorporating it into your digital twin of your device, which would be great. That's really pushing it. And if you now think about actually most of the stuff that we go and move around the place are complex mixtures of things, and predicting the properties of these complex mixtures that make sure your car will run or whatever, that's probably well beyond the current state of the art, but we're moving there. So, you know, there's a lot of chemistry that we still do and know that we can't actually predict. So single molecules, yes, molecules doing things in biology, ooh, tough. Molecules doing things in materials and devices, really tough. But we're making good progress. More computer power, more clever algorithms, more thought. I'm a great believer in augmented intelligence, so people and computers working together. So lots of challenges.
Absolutely, lots of challenges. There are lots of lovely comments in there. Thank you for putting the link to the AI for Science Discovery Network in there, Jeremy, as well. They're great, and they helped with planning and putting together this webinar. So that's a big shout out and thanks to them as well.
And you can listen to Nessa's talk.
Yes, yes. Perfect, cool. I had one slide that we shared at our computational chemistry webinar in December, so I thought it might be useful to bring that up as well. So if you're listening, take a screenshot of it. But obviously it'll be available in the recording as well. And there's been lots of lovely questions that we've had. So a big thank you to our panel, Jeremy, Nessa, Mark, and Darren. Thank you so much for dealing with all those slightly random questions and for sharing your knowledge, the challenges, and how we apply this as well. It's such an important area. So thank you so much for your time today. Really, really appreciate it. It's such a big, important topic, and something that's moving so quickly. It's great to, yeah, and the feedback in the chat has just been thank you, thank you, thank you. This is really interesting. So it shows it kind of been really, really useful. If you are a member of the RSC and you're interested in finding out more, if you've got questions on this topic or you'd like some support with anything related to your career, then you can always talk to us. The career and professional development team are here to help. We do mentoring, one-to-one career support and advice and guidance, and can signpost to other resources and places where you can learn more about these types of skills and anything related to your career. So feel free to get in contact with us. The email address is careers@rsc.org. Thank you very much for listening to the session today. Like I said, the recording will be available, and thank you again to our panelists for giving up their time today. It's been a really interesting, I've learned loads as well. So yeah, really great. So thank you very much and take care, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.